You want to look outward as well, especially for those of us who have our own businesses. We may have people working for us, or we work with external partners. And we want to think about, what are their needs? Like, how do they feel when they come to work? How do they experience this industry? How do they experience this company? What about those that are maybe from marginalized groups? Is their experience different?
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a great one. Our guest is the founder and CEO of Elevate Solutions, an organizational psychologist, a diversity, equity, and inclusion workplace culture expert, and author of The Necessary Journey, Making Real Progress on Equity and Inclusion. Dr. Ella F. Washington, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. And so, Ella, I'd love for you to describe your career journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Yes. So I was a psychology major in undergrad. I attended Spelman College, which is a historically Black college for women in Atlanta, Georgia. And there became my love for understanding what makes people tick on the inside, and also what makes them thrive on the outside, especially in workplaces. And so I was so fascinated by that. I went to Northwestern University and earned my PhD in organizational behavior with a specific focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically around leaders in organizations and how we can have more leaders in organizations from marginalized communities. And so since then, that was about a decade ago, I have been working in the space of consulting and research and writing all about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And part of that work is my work as a professor at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business, where I teach undergraduates and MBA students and executives all about how we can create workplaces where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Wow, that sounds like quite a journey.
Thank you. It has been a fun one, and it's still going.
I'd say just based on the world today, and I would imagine there's like all sorts of, you must be very busy.
Yes, busy. I think like most of your listeners, especially as an entrepreneur, it's tough running a business. It's tough finding time to do all of the things. But I will say that I'm really blessed to love what I do. I think that's what keeps me motivated, keeps me engaged and energized as much as possible. That and coffee, of course.
Oh, yes, I would think so. Me too. And a little bit in the afternoon as well. So when it comes to the work that you're doing and how it applies to the small business owner, the world, there's been pandemic, there's been Black Lives Matter, there's been so many different massive shifts and globally in this conversation. What is it that our listener needs to be thinking about when it comes to equity inclusion?
So I think at the core, my work is about how can we create a workplace utopia of sorts for everyone. And let me explain a little bit what I mean by that. I'm not talking about a workplace where there's unicorns and butterflies. That'd be nice, but that's not what I mean. A workplace utopia is about conceptualizing the idea that the ideal workplace environment for everyone is about making it a reality. And so this concept relies on the belief that the workplace is an ecosystem with different participants and people that contribute. But in the end, we all deserve to have the experience that make us feel happy and valued and respected, especially at work. And everyone's utopia won't be the same, certainly. But when we apply the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really trying to understand what makes people feel valued, what makes people feel that they can thrive, we can work towards having that workplace utopia.
It is something that I think many, from my own personal experience recently, literally days ago, I was taking it was gender inclusion because I coach on my son's hockey team. And one of the things that they launched a couple of years ago is to take training in include gender inclusion. And I mean, there's other courses that would go around the whole, making sure that the way we think or have been brought up is maybe not the way that's the most or the best or most powerful way that you can think in order to make sure that everyone feels included and welcomed. And, even just doing that course, it was about 3 hour long course. It had me thinking so differently about my own thought processes around just the way I see the world and the way others see the world. And I mean, we go about our day. I go about my day, doing my thing, doing my work. It's a very narrow road that I'm on, right? I'm doing my work. I don't often think about that. And how would you, I would imagine this would be the same. I don't think many people wake up and take an inclusion course every day. Have you seen more and more people taking this on and learning from it? What's been your experience?
Absolutely. I think that the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion can be a bit intimidating for some people because sometimes we are talking about those big things, those big moments, such as you mentioned, the murder of George Floyd back in 2020, or, the pandemic and what that did to change our workplace environment, right? But truly, when we're thinking about DEI, it's not about taking a course. That could help, but it's not a requirement. At the core, you want to be thinking about, how do I want to feel when I come to work? How do I want to be treated? How do I want to show up for my colleagues? How do I feel about my job when I'm not at work? Asking yourself those questions will give you an inkling of your experience, right? And then you want to look outward as well, especially for those of us who have our own businesses. We may have people working for us, or we work with external partners. And we want to think about, what are their needs? Like, how do they feel when they come to work? How do they experience this industry? How do they experience this company? What about those that are maybe from marginalized groups? Is their experience different, right? I think as women, entrepreneurs, for example, we know how it is to walk into a room and be the only woman, and, people questioning your competence or ability just because of that fact. Or we know how it is for someone to mansplain to us something that we are probably more educated and competent about than they are, right? And so when we have those moments, we have to think about not only, how they have impact on us, but that's our duty when we're thinking about the broader workplace and even society. Like, how do other groups experience these types of things? And so it's a continuous kind of thought process. Again, yes, trainings are great, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. I think if we get to the foundational pieces of elevating humanity in the workplace, that can help us to move closer to that.
I agree. Just treating people the way we want to be treated is a fundamental one, and quite easy, as you've explained. I think the fear for me has always come from, like, what do I not know? Am I saying the right things? Am I saying the wrong things? I think that the training was interesting because it had me thinking about my own biased ways of thinking. Like, when I think of males and females, there's ways of thinking that I've been brought up. And so it's almost an opportunity for me to challenge my own thinking around those areas, and not even knowing that maybe the way that I say things, the words that come out of my mouth, can make people feel uncomfortable. I mean, it's ignorance on my part because I didn't know that much about it until I took this course. But I think the fear, I mean, for me to even have this conversation, having that course, I'm more educated. I can at least know what we're talking about when we're saying the acronyms. I can repeat the acronyms because they seem to get longer and longer as we go. But I feel more comfortable around it through my own education. And I would say that for us as business people dealing with so many different, and our listeners are multi-country, multi-business areas, it would be definitely a risk not to be increasing the education that we all have around these things.
Absolutely. Increasing our education is, I think, our individual responsibility, right? And so it's great that, you had that experience and that training. And what's interesting, it's not just about the actual training that happens. It's those moments after it. It's the reflection. It's the learning that sticks that we really want to capture because, 90 minutes or 2 hours isn't going to change someone's whole perspective, but it could get them thinking. It could get them asking questions. It could get them, doing more exploratory research and learning. And so that is truly the goal, exactly what you described.
So when it comes to business owners and talking specifically about creating a good working environment, you mentioned, just thinking about it from a very simple perspective. But when you're working with an organization to help them look at this area, what are some of the things that you help them look at when trying to make a good working environment?
Absolutely. So first of all, you want to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion as three different concepts, right? They're often said all in the same breath, and we think of them as the same thing, but they're actually really different. So from a diversity perspective, you want to be thinking about what is the demographic makeup of my teams, and how am I recruiting to make sure that I'm recruiting from a diverse pipeline? And this means demographics, but this also means diversity of thought, because even if you have a demographically diverse team, but everyone went to the same college and everyone, had the same major and thinks the same way, that's still not going to be able to leverage and maximize the benefits of diversity. So you want to be thinking about that, not just in recruitment, but also in promotion and leadership opportunities in your organizations. The second vein is equity. And equity is really that challenging piece because it really does sit in the hands of leadership to look at policies and practices to make sure there's not any unintended negative effects of those policies and practices. Are we making sure that, our practice around time off is equitable for everyone, for example, and getting feedback on those? Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So it's important to ask your team members, ask your employees for feedback on some of those things, especially as entrepreneurs. A lot of these things we built from the ground up. And so we built it based on our vantage point at the time. But, maybe it's time to revisit now that our teams are larger and there's more at stake here. And then from an inclusion perspective, what's really important about inclusion, it's about how you feel and your sense of belonging and connection with your fellow colleagues, but also just as a part of the organization. And one thing that many people get wrong about inclusion, it's not just about the act of including. That's part of it. It's a large part. You have to do something to actually make someone feel included. It doesn't just happen because you're a nice person. You got to go out of your way and ask them to lunch or ask them, to have a one-on-one phone call with you, right? Those are ways you make people feel included. But then you also have to have a feedback loop. You have to check in to see if those things that you are doing to make someone feel included are actually working or have they missed the mark? And I think that's where many organizations kind of get stuck. They have a lot of programs and fun things or, great trainings, as we were talking about, and they never take a step back to say, hey, does putting the pride flag up June 1st every month, does actually make you feel more included as someone in the LGBT community or not, right? Or is there something else we should be doing? And when there's that feedback loop, it is constant evolution. And that's what we want to see in the space of inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'd say that is one where can be challenging. You think you're doing something where what is the impact of it? And I mean, that's communication, increasing communication and channels. And what is it that we're doing? Is it actually making a difference or is it making a negative impact? Let's jump back to the workplace utopia. How did you actually come up with that idea of a workplace utopia for business owners and their staff?
am always shocked by the amount of time that we spend in the workplace or working. The stats are, at least at a minimum, a third of our lives. If we think about all the time that we spend working or connected with work. And honestly, for entrepreneurs, I would say it may be double that because there's so much you pour into your business, right? And so we spend so much of our time of our lives at work, but there's so many people that truly hate their jobs. They truly are not satisfied. They truly don't feel like they're valued. They don't feel excited for work. And not that every day at work is going to be fun. But when you think about you're spending a third of your life doing something, it should be an environment that you feel valued and respected and that you can thrive and be your best self and do your best work. And so that idea of workplace utopia came to me because of that reality. And I want for people to start to shift their mindset that we're not just working for Friday or for the weekend. We see those memes on social media every week. It's like, working all 5 days just to get to the weekend. And then we can't believe it's Monday morning and all those things. And again, while work is still going to be challenging, it should be in a way that you feel like you're being intellectually stimulated, that you're being stretched in a positive way, that you're able to bring your best self. And to me, workplace utopia conceptualizes that.
I love the concept. I'm curious, in your dealings with organizations, have you seen organizations that have been like a utopia for their work, for the people that work inside the organization?
Absolutely. First of all, no workplace is perfect. So again, utopia is certainly idealistic, and it's kind of our guiding light, our North Star of sorts. But no workplace is perfect. But workplaces that I've seen that really get close to this idea of workplace utopia are those that employees truly feel like they can be their authentic self. They can wear their blue hair. They can share about their families if they so choose. They can talk about things they've done on the weekend for fun and not feel othered or different in some way. They feel comfortable speaking up in meetings and sharing ideas, even if they're a little off the wall. They feel that psychological safety. There are workplaces that even if they move on, they have fond feelings of looking back. There are workplaces they may return in the future, or workplaces they would recommend someone else working, right? Those are signals when there is a workplace utopia environment in a workplace.
So are those, like in your experience, are those places engineered that way, or is it leadership that has somehow found their way there? I would imagine it'd be challenging to orchestrate that in any organization that might not be a utopia. Take us from non-utopia or the opposite of utopia to utopia. What's been your experience there?
So, no organizational culture becomes that ideal workplace utopia without intention. It doesn't just happen. Again, even if we're nice people and we have good set of mission and values, we have to be just as intentional about our workplace culture as we are every other part of our business. And I know, especially for small businesses like ours, it can be challenging because you're so focused on getting the work done, you can forget those cultural elements. But for large businesses, they struggle the same, right? There has to be intention behind what we want our workplace culture to be. And then again, that feedback loop of whatever it is that we want our workplace culture to be, is that what's coming across? Are our team members feeling that? Or do we have to make changes? So it's all about intentionality and creating time and space to cultivate that. Relationships don't happen overnight. A large part of culture is relationships. And so you have to create those times for those coffee chats or those walking meetings or, meeting actually in person if you're a virtual team.
So when you through your work and the work that you've done, do you have those favorite clients? Like, it's like, wow, look what they've done. We work with them, we help them do these things. They've gone from here to there. Do you have any stories like that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think my favorite stories are some of those that I shared in my book, The Necessary Journey. Example, Iora Health is one example of a client that we work directly with to kind of understand kind of where they were and what changes they needed to make in their workplace culture. And the way we work with clients is not that we don't tell them what they should do. We do assessments, kind of let them know what their employees are thinking and feeling. So we looked at engagement scores. We had focus groups. We had stakeholder interviews. We met one-on-one with the leadership team and collectively with the larger leadership team. We did all of those things and shared with the leadership, this is what's happening in your organization. And then we worked side by side with them to come up with a plan to make changes, to implement more cultural elements, to be able to honor people's diversity and make people feel a bit more included. And so my favorite clients are those who not get it right or are perfect, but those who are willing to do the work and work alongside our team to get to, whatever that goal they've set for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like it's collaborative, but here's what it is. How do you, like even asking somebody, how do you think you can make it better is probably a heck of a lot more effective than saying, well, go do this. I mean, if they don't believe that or own that themselves, it's likely not going to happen. So with that example, what were some of the major changes that they made? You mentioned like they added more cultural things, but were there specific things that for them really made a big difference?
Well, the three things that I talk about in my book are progress, pitfalls, and purpose. So starting with purpose, you want to make sure you're super clear on what is it we're trying to accomplish. Just saying we care about DEI is not enough. You got to be more granular than that. You have to really say, what is it that we are trying to accomplish? Are we focused on our demographic diversity right now? Are we worried about people, leaving the organization? So we're really worried about feelings of belonging and inclusion. Do we think our programs are a little bit inequitable in some way, or our policies, right? Or it can be a mix of all those things, but we're going to be really clear on not only what we're trying to accomplish and why, how does this connect back to the purpose and mission of our organization? Just doing it for the sake of doing it or because it's on trend or anything of that nature is not going to lead to sustainable progress that you can maintain over time. And so that's the first thing, making sure your purpose is super clear. The second element is acknowledging your pitfalls. What's held us back from reaching that goal that we talked about in the past? Is it that, we're not as transparent as we could be? Is it that people who join our organization who haven't been here since the very beginning, they don't really know where they fit in? It could be a myriad of things, but it takes a mirror reflective process to really be honest and candid about what is holding us back. What are the things maybe we haven't considered, or what are the areas that maybe we've actually made a mistake, right? And that we need to course correct. And so being honest about those pitfalls is key. And then the last part is progress. What does progress look like? Everything won't change overnight. So we got to be super clear. What are our short-term and long-term goals? What exactly does progress look like? What are the metrics that we can put in place to track, if our recruitment efforts are being successful? If we're worried about our culture, what elements do we have to measure that? What are the feedback loops do we have in place or do we need to put in place to measure those things? I'm a huge proponent of what gets measured gets done. And so if you want to see progress, you got to think about short-term and long-term goals in ways that are measurable.
It makes a lot of sense. And I'm just thinking of our listener, and as we spoke prior to the show, small micro-sized businesses, many of them work solo, but they work with a lot of other organizations that are typically much larger than their own. How would you say a person in that role, where they maybe have a few staff, but they're working with lots of different organizations, what would you say would be important for them to be thinking about with this conversation?
So just making sure I understand the question, it's about how do you work with organizations that are much larger than yours? Sorry, I think, sure the question.
Like from the perspective of the example that you gave, these are large organizations where there's many, many people in the organization, and conversations can be had. If it's somebody who's solo, working for themselves, or listening to this conversation right now, I'm curious how you would think that with themselves or maybe a small team, and also the greater community that they work in, whether it be their customers and the staff of their own customers, what's really important for them to be thinking about when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion? Maybe that it's not necessarily in their organization. I mean, if they're one person, they've got it all handled, right? Because they're just one. But when we talk about this is a bigger conversation, a more community conversation, how would someone embark upon improving themselves in this area?
Understood. Okay. So one of the really important concepts that I talk about is considering your whole sphere of influence. And as business owners, whether you have one employee yourself or you have 20 or 50 or 100, we all have a sphere of influence, but it's not just about the people that we work with or who work for us. It's also our larger sphere of influence. Every single person has a sphere of influence, our immediate family, people that we come in contact with every day, our larger extended networks, our social media networks. Like, we all have an opportunity to impact the lives of other people every single day. And for some of us, our sphere is larger than others. For me, my largest sphere of influence, I would say, is the classroom, and where I teach hundreds of students every single year, and have the opportunity to hopefully impart some knowledge and get them to be thinking a little bit differently about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But no matter if your sphere of influence is, the one or two people that live in your household or hundreds of or thousands of people, we each have an opportunity to have an impact. And so I think understanding that and not thinking about any conversation as too small. If it's, family members and have differing perspectives, maybe that you're sharing something that allows them to open their mind and learn about the importance of equity and inclusion. And maybe it's your team members leading by example. A lot of what we know in our literature about DEI is that people often can't be what they can't see. And so if they've never seen a woman in leadership in that particular way, or a woman business owner, or, some other marginalized group in those positions of leadership and power, that itself is having a positive impact on sphere of influence. So I certainly don't think of this as just for large companies. I think we all are on the journey, and we can all contribute positively to someone else's journey as well.
So true. So when it comes to your book, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the book, why you wrote it, and as well what our listener could get out of reading it.
Absolutely. So this book is a book of stories. It is narrative format. And the reason why, there's a lot of great books on diversity, equity, inclusion out there, and you should check them out. But my book specifically is to bring you into the lives and the experiences of corporations, some and some you'll just learn in the book, big and small, right? And it's all about kind of making sure that we are demystifying what DEI is all about. I wanted stories because in stories, it's really the key for people to understand one another. And so we may hear about this company and the 5 things they've done for DEI this year, for example, but how did they get there? Where did they struggle? What questions were their leaders asking themselves and asking other people? Did they go through some hard times? Did they have to take steps back on their journey? I think that's what really makes it something that people can truly understand and connect with. And so when you read the book, you'll be able to see what the DEI journey is all about, the stages that companies go through, and the stories of real life people and how they have struggled and triumphed and in between on their DEI journeys.
Very cool. Well, it sounds like a book that's very and would be very enjoyable based on the fact that it's stories, and as well important for the time that we're living in, not only for ourselves, but for me, I think about my children. How do I want them to view the world and be in the world with the things that they're going to come across, and create the possibility that we'd not only have utopia workplaces, but maybe utopia world too.
Absolutely.
There's definitely a lot of work to be done out there. So Ella, this has been great. I'd love for you to also share if there was a website specific to the book, or your own website, if our listener wanted to learn more about you and connect with you, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Ella F. Washington on LinkedIn. Also visit my website, ellafwashington.com. You can also check out the book at thenecessaryjourney.com.
Beautiful. Well, Ella, on behalf of our listener, I want to thank you for your generosity in coming on our show And as well, thank you for the good work that you're doing in the world to make the world a better place.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is all ours. And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.